And my sisters and brothers, may the Lord give you peace. Thank you again for joining us. So let me ask you, is it easier to live in a fishbowl or in the ocean? Because, you get to know all the parts in a fishbowl. The waters are calm. You regularly get fed. Living in a fishbowl, you get to look out and not be disturbed, nor have to get involved in too much. An ocean, on the other hand, is vast. It's mostly a dark, foreboding place. Oceans are filled with hostile creatures, making it a eat or be eaten world. So the longing to escape from such a world and be isolated and happily out of touch in a fishbowl has always been a temptation. One could say that's the very reason the religious leaders of Jesus' time overlooked him entirely. They lived in a fishbowl. There was Jesus, as large as life, as large as true God must be, caring, forgiving, healing, uttering parables loaded with grace, ready to lay down his life 100 times for everyone or anyone, and yet smallness was their preference. Their concept of God had become petty. They saw God merely as the Chief Justice of the cosmic Supreme Court, the author of a million petty ways of doing things, the source of minute rules governing everything from Sabbath behavior and hygiene to the limited options open to the childless widow. All of this makes one suspect that the aloof, biased, and irritable God, their irritable God, was more of a reflection of themselves than of the original intimate God of the Bible, who walked with Adam in the cool of the evening and dined in triplicate with Abraham outside his shepherd's tent. And since Jesus didn't fall into their narrow concept of God and their God's way of doing things, they ultimately wrote him off. Oh yes, when Jesus first came upon the scene, valuing people more than the rules and the regulations, saying things like the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath, when he did not hesitate to dine with a public sinner or allow himself to be touched by a prostitute, when he began to forgive people's sins as if it was the easiest thing in the world to do, they did become curious and concerned. They sent delegations to size him up, to match him against the standards of the ominous God they worshipped, and they found him totally out of sync. They couldn't contain him in the old wineskins they were carrying. And so they turned away to continue their tedious search for the answers of life amid the footnotes of their tradition, safe in the smallness of a fishbowl. And let's not forget ourselves. A couple of generations ago, most of us lived and swam in fishbowls of Catholicism. Yes, it was a wonderful place where pretty much everyone we knew was Catholic. We believed the same things and all celebrated the same seasons, the same cycles of fasts and feasts, and yet no longer. And the people want to go back to this. They want that. What I'm going to call again, that, this safety. However, like Dorothy of Technicolor Oz, you have to eventually return to the sepia-colored Kansas. Listen again. Holy Father, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but you protect them from the evil one. I send them into the world. In other words, Jesus does not want us living in fishbowls, but rather to swim truth in the hostile world or the hostile ocean that hates us. He wants us, as we heard in that first reading, to be like those first disciples, witnesses of resurrection. We are to be in the world and not of the world. But that's not an easy life to live with the surrounding culture that no longer supports Christianity. But nor does it have to. Remember, we make a personal commitment to Christ, not society. Sunday is holy to Christians, not to society. And that's okay. So how do we live in the world but not of the world? How do you do it when balancing work, children, food preparation, taxiing older children to events, laundry, and a spouse? How do you create balance when you are a single parent? How do you live in a world where nation after nation's parliaments and congresses are voting to legalize euthanasia? where budget cuts and programs continue to threaten the poor and those on the cusp? How do you counter working on a holy day, Sunday, when your family budget doesn't make ends meet and you may have to work 2 or 3 jobs? How do you live a committed married life, swimming in a society where commitment is no longer more than hooking up and divorce is the norm? How do you survive the temptations of consumerism, the bombardment of advertising telling us what we need and we cannot live without? How do we deal with so many issues that are no longer, really, you can't see them anymore as good and evil, but having a good on both sides? How do we do it? If we're going to make a difference, we have to reflect on Christmas. How's that for ending Easter season? The incarnation of the only true God, worth believing in. God became human and entered this world. And in this world, Jesus encountered the cruel Roman society he lived in. He taught about taxes and God. He countered Pilate's question, what is truth, with his own declaration, I am truth. And I think it's important for us to realize we keep getting in these arguments about, is this true or that true? Truth is not words. Truth is a person, right? And he was crucified for his answer and life. There was talk of divorce in his own family, wasn't there? At the time of his birth, which was marked by government-sponsored murder of children in Bethlehem. He encountered adultery and slavery, but he encountered it all. He encountered it all and entered it all with compassion and healing, revealing the truth that ours is a God. Ours is a God of unrelenting understanding and compassion. Retreating into a fishbowl is no longer an option. No one will hear us or see us. They will simply pass by. But like Jesus, we do not abandon the world, but are here to embrace it in love and compassion. Not by defending our faith and our moral teachings with arguments. That will no longer suffice. We will need to dialogue with our society, as Pope John XXIII encouraged, and be persuasive, not with our arguments, but with our lives. And living such lives that we begin to raise in the lives of others questions. Why are those Christians like this? Why do they do what they do? We will need to steep ourselves in prayer as individuals, as families, and as a gathered community on Sundays for insight, discernment, and strength, where, like in today's gospel, Jesus' prayer assures us that in this ocean of the world we're in, we are always under the protective care of our God. My brothers and sisters, our creed is a simple one. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God in him and her. In that we see the pattern of Jesus' own life, not to escape from the world, but to engage the world and all its distortions, wounds, and pressures, so that all people will have a more abundant life.